can our kindness, I'm not talking about niceness, but our kindness, actual self-sacrifice be used against us? In this episode, Tara and I talk about selfishness versus selflessness and how to examine our inner motives, but also to evaluate the wisdom of extending ourselves to risky or toxic people. And the self-help tip is using self-observation as a way to know whether or not someone warrants our kindness and generosity. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, where we talk about strategies, tips, and tricks on navigating and recovering from narcissistic abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health clinician with over 20 years experience and author of Love You More, a graphic inside look at my experience of a toxic relationship.
And I'm your other host, Tara Blair-Ball, certified relationship coach, abuse survivor, and author of Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships with the 7-Step Guided Journal.
We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the show. It has been a huge challenge for me to sort through selfishness versus selflessness, especially as recovering from abuse because of the loss of self and finding self-respect. Finding that line has been so tricky, so tough, because I had been raised to think that the big-hearted thing is to give of myself for others, and that has been a defining thing of me. But I've realized that it put me at great risk in that abusive relationship. So I've been trying to tease this out for myself, and it's been really tough. How have you been doing with that?
So as someone who struggles with codependency, I heard years ago from a therapist the difference between caretaking and caregiving. That caregiving is when we can give to others without expecting something in return, but caretaking is when we give with some kind of expectation or ulterior motive. And that's often how I've been able to tell, like you mentioned, the whole feeling like it's at a cost or there's a high price to pay. That's where I have to check in with myself of why am I doing this? What am I expecting when I give this or do this? And am I expecting something in return or some kind of thing to set up? Because then I'm just going to get resentful and angry and bitter if that's the case. And I really have to learn to I have to be better about just saying no in general, in life.
Yeah, that's certainly been my journey too, trying to figure out the difference between those two lines, because I was raised with this concept in a very evangelical Christian home of joy being Jesus first, others second, and you last. So that means every time that you put yourself first, then somehow you're knocking Jesus out of the way, which makes you a bad person. Or maybe even talk about it, who's at the throne in the center of your life? Are you sitting on that throne, or is God sitting on that throne? So there was a lot of indoctrination about all of that. And I'm not saying that's all bad, but what I am saying is that it confuses the fact of what does self-love look like, because it makes all forms of self-love then toxic or selfish anyway, at least selfish or prideful. What got me, though, which really, really tripped me up, is I figured out pretty early on that doing it for selfish reasons, in other words, being kind to you, showing you niceness and generosity in order to get you to be the same back to me, was in a form of manipulation, actually. And I learned to sort of let go of that and just do because that's who I wanted to be. It's a reflection of me. It's who I want to be. It's sort of ethical for me. But what really tripped me up, Tara, in that abusive relationship was that there are people who sees kindness. I'm not using niceness on purpose, because to me, niceness is sort of a social nicety that we do that is a form of exploitation of itself. But when we do things, kindness, it's deliberate, it's thoughtful, it's truly sacrificial, that they see that as pitiful, pathetic, exploitable, worthy of disrespect, because they see the world in a very, very different way. They see it in a competitive world. So they then want to know, what is your reason? Or are you that idiotic that you would openly open yourself up to be exploited by me? You're asking for it. So I've had to learn that I need to then not only judge my motives, but also consider possible motives of the person that I'm doing it for, and whether or not I'm actually opening myself to be hurt by them, possibly, if I'm not careful. So that's a completely new angle that I'm trying to sort out now.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
It makes it complicated. That's the hard part. It makes it super complicated. Yeah, because here's the thing. I think back to that former relationship. let's just assume for a moment his cry for help was truly a real cry for help. It wasn't, but let's just for a moment assume that. Then that would make sense that my stepping in to giving the help, trying to find the right resources, or at least supporting his seeking treatment was good that I did that. But now I'm realizing that may have been a good behavior, but it was behavior that got exploited. Or even like right now, somebody got a hold of me last night who said that their partner is threatening to harm themselves if she doesn't come back, and that he's suicidal. What does she do? Does she just what if he's really suicidal? Does she just sort of like, oh well, too bad, good luck with that? Or is the right human thing to do some kind of measure of help? Like, it becomes with these moments. Now we know that because this person has been really exploitive of her, and he's done this to her before, he's hoovered her before, that it's probably another effort to hoover her again. So it's exploitive, it's manipulative, but it gets tricky. These lines are really, really hard to navigate, because there's the human thing, the compassionate thing, and then there's the ways in which that we then are vulnerable for abuse. And sometimes they're right against each other. What I advised her to do was contact his family, reach out to emergency service. You don't have to be the one that saves him, but you certainly can let others know that he needs saving.
Yeah. And that's what I've suggested to clients who've come to me with a similar thing, is reach out for outside help, but doesn't have to come from you. You're not the person that can really help if that's really their intention. But it is emotionally abusive, emotionally manipulative for someone to throw that out. I just keep thinking about your comment about, judging others' motives as well as our own. And you're right. It is. I'm stuck on that.
Yeah, you got really silent. I know. I realized I stunned you with that.
And I'm like, let me look back and think. And yeah, it is. It is tough. It is tough. I think today, so in my current relationship, for example, my husband has asked me multiple times to help him meal prep. And so this is like this is not a toxic relationship, but this is mundane. And I've always said no. And I know he would really love me to meal prep for him. I know that's something he would love. But I feed 3 children on my own because I'm the primary caretaker for our kids. And I'm not gonna meal prep so you have this like special diet. I'm not gonna do all that extra work so you have a special diet when I'm already taking care of 3 individuals and can barely remember to feed myself. And I've always said no, and I know for a fact if I was to do it today, I would get extremely resentful and irritated, and and I would say things to myself like, well, why isn't he meal prepping for me? Like, I'm gonna be meal prepped for, but it's, today I'm able to do that, and he asks it, but it's not something that he gets mad at me for not doing it. He understands why I say no and why I don't do it. I don't have that extra place on my plate. I don't. But in the past, that would always be used against me. It didn't matter. This other person wouldn't take into consideration my other tactics or duties. They would just minimize it or be like, well, you're just staying at home with the kids. Like, you have nothing else to do, even though I was taking care of newborn infants, newborn twins. Like, you don't have any other time. Like, you don't even do the work that I ask you to do anyway, So it was never good enough when I said no. There was always pushback, always that kind of thing. And I still would sometimes feel guilted into doing stuff, and then resentful because I'd been guilted into doing something that I knew I didn't have any space for or any time. And so it's not just like, I think, judging the motives of others, but also just like being aware too of what comes around the ask, like being guilted. I was guilted a lot in that relationship and other toxic or abusive ones. I just was constantly guilted, about those things.
You're making a powerful point, and that is, does the person see you? Do they really see you? Like, I know it, and I even know the argument is like, we're already prepping food. How hard it is to prep my food?
Right.
So it's a little bit, so you're already buying groceries. Why can't you think about the kind of groceries that I also need? I mean, I totally know the line of argument, but what's also being ignored is all the mental energy, having to know what that diet is, having to be able to prep a whole separate group of food with a whole separate group of containers. By the way, you can tell I know because I've done this because my late husband was gluten-free for a while. So I experienced that. I lived it. It's a lot of hard work when you ask somebody to do that. Yeah. I did do it for a while, and I also didn't do it for a while. It kind of depended on my state and whether or not I had it in me to do that. But this is the other thing. This is what right now I live with my adult middle son, and there are certain things he takes care of in the house, and there's certain things that I take care of the house. And one of the things that he does is he completely creates the grocery list. He grocery shops. He pays for the groceries. He puts the groceries away, and he often, if I let him, cooks for me. Whenever he even makes the menu for the week, if I let him. Sometimes I have my own ideas of what I want to eat. But he's not very good at cleaning up. That's just not a strong point of his, but he does all this other manual labor. I don't have to think about it. I don't even pay for it. I mean, so I don't like the cleanup part, but I remind myself this is a person who's carrying a lot of a mental load that I don't have to carry. And yes, I can carry some of the mental load and the work around some other things that maybe are not my favorite things, but I'm sure he doesn't always like that grocery bill. And I'm sure he doesn't always have every week the time to do this, but he's doing it. So to me, I kind of like assess, is he seeing me? Absolutely, he sees me. He even remembers what I want, and I don't even have to tell him. Then can I see him? Can I then return that favor, even in areas that I don't always like? Absolutely. That helps me, because sometimes I think there are people who just do it because they expect it. It's sort of like they're entitled to that, and they don't even know that there's privilege to this. That to ask you to do that is so much work and takes so much time and so much cleanup time on top of it. But they don't. And I'm not saying about your relationship, because I know you got a good relationship, but with some people, there's not that reciprocity. That's not that kind of a balanced sacrifice. So that's also what I measure is this person seeing me the way that I'm seeing them? But I think it's still super important. I want to circle back to this, because this is where it really tripped me up, is that we can come at it from the complete right place. We can come at it from assessing it correctly. We can come at it doing it in a balanced way that shows our self-respect, and it still can be exploited. And it's important for us not to forget there's a mindset of other people. Some people, fortunately, it's only 20% of the world, but roughly, according to Sandra Brown, 20% of the world's predatory, and they really see things differently. And they really, like, back to that episode when we talked about, I think it was a dark triad, we talked about the 4 roles. You're either a patron, you're patsy, you're the pawn, or you're the enemy. And there is no room in that world. You're one of those 4 positions. And if you do things for them, ask what they ask you, you're either being a patron who's giving them influence, you're patsy and they're setting you up, they're pawn or they're using you, or they think you're an idiot because you're the enemy. And we forget that not all of our good behavior is doing good things for us. Sometimes it's making us at risk, really putting us in a dangerous position. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. How do we know that? I mean, we don't often know that. And I think sometimes for me, I have to lead with being a good person from the start, but then assess what does that person do with it? Is there reciprocity in this relationship? Do I see more contempt? If I do a good thing and they come back with contempt, that's a sign to me this person now disrespects me because of my kindness, because of my generosity. Are they showing me the same kind of sacrificial behavior back towards me? Is their words lining up with their behavior? Am I seeing consistency with what they say and what they're doing? All of this helps me to know more about this person.
Yeah. And coming back to what we talked about in the beginning, just the idea of looking at our own behavior, like I think it's really easy to not necessarily think about the motives of others or to believe, at least for myself, I always gave people the benefit of the doubt, even if they responded with contempt, like you mentioned. Like I would just think it was because I didn't do something right, or I needed to change what I was doing, or I always internalized it, brought it back to myself, blamed myself. That was just sort of my nature, But if I could assess my motives, a lot of the times my actions would look really kind and loving from the outside. But like I remember going to buy my ex like some sweet thing that he wanted from the grocery store. And my thought was, if I buy this for him, I hope he'll be nice to me. Like I was trying, and I at the time did not see that as my desire to control him, but that's what it was, is that my desire to try to control and manipulate him into treating me with kindness and basic human decency. I would do these things, these games, these whatever, to try to figure out. I was always buying him like little things in the hopes of this will be the thing that, I'll let him play his video game. I will do this in the hopes that he will treat me this way. And I was trying to constantly manage and juggle his emotions, and I could never predict the reaction. I might buy him some ice cream or whatever, and he'd be like, why the fuck did you buy this for me? I'm on a diet, even though I didn't know he was on a diet. Or he'd love it, but then still ignore me. Or who knows? Like, it just was so unpredictable, back to that intermittent reinforcement that we talked about in the last episode. But my intentions were always with, I will do this because I want something from this. I have an action. I have a motivation for this. That's beyond just, I'm being kind or nice.
Mine was, I kept thinking I could model good behavior and then they would want to be like me.
Oh.
That I would be like the teacher, sort of the,
right.
the wise psychologist. And then like, oh, that's what caring behavior looks like. Or, oh, that's what generosity looks like. I was like, so silly. And we're talking about adult people and adult males. Come on, let's get realistic here. One of the things my ex would do is he'd take me to the Rolex store and look at his favorite watch. And I know, at the time, I kind of knew he was hoping I'd buy it to him as a gift. And this is a guy who, for one of the gifts that he gave me, was a re-gift from an affair.
Oh my God.
That's the kind of level of generosity was back towards me, was absolute shit. And yet he would take, like I said, literally walk into a Rolex store and look at his favorite watch. And then he would say, and of course, this was a paradoxical intervention, although I don't know if he knew that's what it was called, but he'd say, I don't want you to buy that for me. I just like looking. Like, oh no, dude, there's a ulterior motive here. You're hoping that I will buy it for you, but I'm not. So, but yeah, I was really, I wasn't originally, maybe early on in my college years, I definitely did nice things, hoping people would be nice back to me. But then I just started doing nice things, because I wanted to be nice. But I also sometimes did nice things because I hoped that it was a good example. I thought that I was leading by example, not realizing that I was just setting myself up for exploitation.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that near the end of my first marriage, when I got pregnant with the first baby, I bought an amazing trip to a college that my ex-husband had always wanted to visit. It's like one of those colleges where, football is king, and they have all these rituals and, routines that are set up around football games. So I bought him this trip for us to go see this football game, and it was his family's team. They'd always wanted to go visit or whatever. I bought him this trip for us to go to a football game together. And it was his dream trip that he'd always wanted to go to for his whole life. His dream trip, okay? Now, this is the same person who, in our relationship, I had begged every single year. I love the mountains. I was like, I really would like to go to a cabin in the mountains. I would love for that, okay? And the one time he took me to the mountains, he was terrible to me the whole time. Like, I remember we got to the cabin and he was having trouble with a fishing rod, and he threw it across the room and treated me terribly. And it just sucked, And when I got him this trip, we were in couples therapy, and he said in couples therapy, I'm so excited about this trip. I'm gonna actually plan and set up what we're gonna do. And that reminded me of that trip where he bought it, but then planned nothing for it because it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
It wasn't, even though it was supposed to be a trip for me, a pleasure trip and something I'd always wanted. Yeah. He was only going to plan if it was for him. And that level of selfishness before that, I really struggled seeing. And that was really probably the first time I'd truly seen it. That, wow, you're going to plan that one?
This really reminds me, I had an epiphany this week about a Bible verse to kind of circle back to my, bringing up. There's a verse in it that never made sense to me. It just confused me. It says, don't throw pearls before swine. Now, you could say, don't do careless things to things that don't deserve it, and you think about what swine is to a Jewish tradition, and which is it's a meat that they don't eat, they see as unclean. So you could consider, like, don't take something that's precious and then waste it on something that's just not even edible to you. But it hit me this week that our kindness is the pearls, and not everybody deserves the kindness. You taking all that effort to set that vacation up was an incredible kindness. But he didn't really show the fact that he could value what you were giving him, that it was just like casting pearls before swine, that it was wasted. I saw myself do that over and over and over in an abusive relationship. And again, I think it comes back to, there's a couple angles that I think is really important, is who do you want to be ethically? That your moral code lines up with yourself. And yes, it's always important that if you want to be a kind person, to practice kindness. But I also think that sometimes we don't need to practice anything. Sometimes we don't need to be mean, and we don't need to be kind. We can just not be involved. So I try to assess this when I meet these situations, like, what's really being asked for out of here? Do I have to show up? Is it requiring that out of me? Is this person am I doing it for a higher purpose, or am I doing it for myself, or am I, what's sort of my motivations? And that helps me then to navigate these a little less, risky, in a little less of a risky way.
Yeah. I got in the habit to sort of work on this motive for myself, is just matching what was given to me, which can feel really shitty, especially to those of us who struggle with codependency and feeling like we have to exist with external approval and validation. But if, for example, if someone sent me a text, I would respond, and then I would wait for them to respond. And I wouldn't just I would wait. If I set up some plans, I would wait until they set up the next set of plans before I did that. And that kind of helped me, honestly, pare back the level of energy that I was giving, and to really reassess some relationships. For example, there were some relationships that had become one-sided. I was the only person maintaining them, that kind of thing. But I really had to check, what are my motives here, and what am I matching what's given to me? Is there that reciprocity that you talk about a lot? And a lot of times there wasn't necessarily.
Yeah. What hit me when you were saying all of that is that you have been one of the most generous people that I have met that didn't, for a stranger. I mean, when you and I, our paths crossed, I wasn't anybody to you. I was nobody. I was somebody who was just trying to get into an area that you're already doing and doing very, very successfully. But over and over, you would show up and be extraordinarily kind and generous to me in an undeserved way. I never deserved that. It was just an expression of who you are, Tara. And that's one thing that I've always kind of come back, and I ask myself about people. It's is this a reciprocal relationship? Do I see ulterior motives here? Is this a person who's also sacrificial themselves? And that kind of helps me know whether or not there's a safety. And that's how I've always known, yes, this is a person because I'm a very generous person. I like to help people out. But it's made me to know that you've been safe to do that with because of that. And it's just something I just really appreciate about you. Really, really appreciate about you. So to wrap this up, I think there's not this, as much as this seems like a black and white issue, it's not. That's what the more you and I talked about it, the more complex it got, and the more nuanced it got, and more issues there are. But it really comes back to, I think that we have to be having big conversations with ourselves all the time. And maybe that's a good self-help tip, is to talk about the importance of introspection and to sort of weed out, I don't know what would be a good way to call this, but I know that it's really helped me a lot. I often call it getting the map level of something. I kind of stand above and sort of ask myself, what's this person's relationship like with me? What is it they're seeking from me? What is a relationship like with other people? Is there reciprocity? What do I want out of this relationship? Am I have ulterior motives? Not that it's wrong or bad, because we all do. It's called secondary gains. We all want those things. But for me to sort of stand up and kind of stand back and sort of take the big inventory, and then you can that helps you see where there's more manipulation going on, or when there's sort of inequity going on, or maybe there's issues of control. It just really helps to give you a better lay of the land. And then that helps me to know whether or not that person's safe enough to do good things, or maybe there's good reasons. Sometimes I take risks and do good things when it's not safe, but that's because of who I want to be. But it helps me to know that and be more intentional, so that when it doesn't come back, then I'm not so hurt because I knew that when I was going into that.
Yeah. In what ways have you struggled with seeing yourself as selfish? And did you find today's conversation helpful in seeing that differently? You can let us know by emailing us at hello@breakingfreewithkerrytara.com. If you haven't yet, make sure you follow or subscribe, write us a review, and if you know someone who would benefit from this episode, make sure to share it with them. If you're not following us on social media yet, you can check me out at tara.relationshipcoach and Kerry at Kerry McAvoy PhD. And we will see you back here next time.